Welcome to Lecture 12, Foreign Policy of Egypt. Introduction. In previous lectures, we have examined the concept of foreign policy. We have looked at the objectives, instruments, structures, and institutions of foreign policy. We see that various geographical, historical, social, and political determinants contribute to shaping the nature of foreign policy and the conduct of a country's international relations. But don't forget that the main objective of this course is to learn about the substance of the foreign policies of Africa. Therefore, in subsequent lectures, we shall examine the foreign policies of African states. For the purpose of this course, I have divided Africa into North, South, West, and East. For better understanding, we shall examine the foreign policy of one country each from each of the regions, that is, Egypt, North, South Africa, South, Nigeria, West, and Kenya, East. Therefore, for this lecture, we shall examine the formation and conduct of foreign policy in Egypt. At the end of this lecture, you should be able to describe the strategic importance of Egypt on the African continent. Explain Egypt's foreign policy. Content. Egypt occupies a strategic position on a land bridge between two continents, Africa and Asia, and a link between two principal waterways, the Mediterranean Sea and the Indian Ocean. Most of the country lies in Africa, but the easternmost portion of Egypt, the Sinai Peninsula, is usually considered part of Asia. It forms the only land bridge between the two continents. Most of Egypt's terrain is desert, divided into two unequal parts by the Nile River. The valley and delta of the Nile are the main centers of habitation. The capital and largest city is Cairo. Egypt is the third largest economy in the Middle East and North Africa (MENA) region after Iran and Saudi Arabia. Its gross domestic product in 2009 was $152.3 billion, making it a similar size to the Czech Republic and Singapore. The Arab League headquarters is in Cairo, and the Secretary General of the League is traditionally an Egyptian. Former Egyptian Foreign Minister Moussa is the present Secretary General of the Arab League. President Mubarak has often chaired the African Union, formerly the Organization of African Unity. Former Egyptian Deputy Prime Minister Boutros Ghali served as Secretary General of the United Nations from 1991 to 1996. Egypt is a key partner in the search for peace in the Middle East and resolution of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Sadat's groundbreaking trip to Israel in 1977, the 1978 Camp David Accords, and the 1979 Egypt-Israel Peace Treaty represented a fundamental shift in the politics of the region, from a strategy of confrontation to one of peace as a strategic choice. Egypt was subsequently ostracized by other Arab states and ejected from the Arab League from 1979 to 1989. Egypt played an important role in the negotiations leading to the Madrid Peace Conference in 1991, which, under US and Russian sponsorship, brought together all parties in the region to discuss Middle East peace. This support has continued to the present, with President Mubarak often intervening personally to promote peace negotiations. In 1996, he hosted the Sharm el-Sheikh Summit of the Peacemakers, attended by President Bill Clinton and other world leaders. In 2000, he hosted two summits at Sharm el-Sheikh and one at Taba in an effort to resume the Camp David negotiations suspended in July of 2000. And in June 2003, Mubarak hosted President George W. Bush for another summit on the Middle East peace process. Throughout mid-2004, Egypt worked closely with Israel and the Palestinian Authority to facilitate stability following Israel's withdrawal from Gaza, which occurred in August and September of 2005. Prior to this, Egypt and Israel reached an agreement that allowed Egypt to deploy additional forces along the Philadelphia corridor in an attempt to control the border and prevent the smuggling of weapons. Egypt played a key role during the 1990-91 Gulf crisis, President Mubarak helped assemble the international coalition and deployed 35,000 European troops against Iraq to liberate Kuwait. The Egyptian contingent was the third largest in the coalition forces after the US and UK in the aftermath. In the aftermath of the Gulf War, Egypt signed the Damascus Declaration with Syria and the Gulf states to strengthen Gulf security. Egypt continues to contribute regularly to UN peacemaking missions, most recently in East Timor, Sierra Leone, and Liberia. In August 2004, Egypt was actively engaged in seeking a solution to the crisis in the Darfur region of Sudan, including the dispatch of military monitors. Following the September 11, 2001 terrorist attacks on the United States, Egypt, which has itself been the target of terrorist attacks, has been a key supporter of US efforts against terrorists and terrorist organizations such as Osama bin Laden and Al-Qaeda. In July 2005, terrorists attacked the Egyptian city of Sharm el-Sheikh. In the same month, Egypt's envoy to Iraq was assassinated. Factors affecting Egypt's foreign policy. Geopolitics. This inevitably shaped Egypt's foreign policy. Egypt occupies a strategic position as a land bridge between two continents and a link between two principal waterways, the Mediterranean Sea and the Indian Ocean. It must therefore be strong enough to dominate its environment or risk becoming the victim of outside power. Its security is also linked to control of the Nile, and whose water its survival depends. Political strategy. Egypt was potentially at the center of three cycles: the African, the Arab, and the Islamic. Egypt viewed itself as playing a major role in Africa. Beyond that, was long a leading mover in the wider Third World camp and a major advocate of neutralism and non-alignment. This geopolitical importance made the country the object of interest to the great powers, and when Egypt was strong enough as under Gamal Abdel Nasser allowed it to play the great powers against each other and win political support and economic and military aid from all sides. Even the weakened Egypt of Hosni Mubarak was able to parlay its strategic importance in the Arab-Israeli conflict and as a bulwark against Islamic political activism into political support and economic aid from both the West and the Arab world. This leadership position also meant that Egypt was a natural part of the inter-Arab power balance, typically embroiled in the rivalries that split the Arab world and a part of the solidarities that united it. Anti-imperialist non-alignment. Egypt's long history of subordination to foreign rulers, especially European imperialism, produced an inferiority complex, an intense anti-imperialism, a quest for dignity, and particularly under Nasser, a powerful national pride among Egyptians. Egypt's national ideal was to be independent of both East and West, to be a strong, prosperous state, to stand up to Israel, and to lead the Arab world. Yet, as a poverty-stricken developing country and a new state actor in the international power game, Egypt could not do without large amounts of economic aid and military assistance from the advanced economies and the great powers. Such dependency, of course, carried heavy costs and threats to national independence. The problem of dependency could be minimized by diversifying aid sources al-Nasser initially pursued a policy of balance between East and West, which won aid from both sides and minimized dependence on anyone. United Nations support for Israel after the June 1967 war made Egypt ever more dependent on the Soviet Union for military aid and protection, but this dependence was in part balanced by increasing financial aid from the conservative Arab oil states. By the late 1970s, President Anwar al-Sadat, in choosing to rely on American diplomacy to recover Egyptian land from Israel, and in allowing his ties to the Soviet Union and the Arab world to wither, had led Egypt into heavy economic and military dependency on the United States. This dependency, by precluding foreign policy decisions displeasing to Israel and Washington, sharply limited Egyptians' pursuit of a vigorous Arab and independent foreign policy. Egyptian foreign policy objectives include fostering peace and stability regionally and internationally, abiding by a balanced foreign policy that is related to the strategic goals and interests within an Egyptian independent decision-making, entrenching the principle of mutual respect among nations, adhering to the principles of international law, respecting covenants and charter, supporting the role of international organizations, enhancing solidarity among nations, and prompting efforts to reform the United Nations, paying special attention to the economic dimension of international relations, considering the Arab sphere a key active more domain for Egypt's foreign policy, while continuing to concentrate on the foreign activities related to other vital spheres, namely the Islamic and African and Egypt's relations with the Nile Basin countries. The 2011 revolution and Egyptians' foreign policy. A democratic revolution in Egypt started in early 2011 when its people rose up in secular protests demanding change and reform of their government and way of life. But the confrontation quickly transitioned into chaos and a vicious and violent struggle for power as the Muslim Brotherhood and other professional Islamic agitators joined in, bringing a reaction from Egypt's security forces. This revolution has greatly affected Egypt's foreign policy, a dramatic change in Egypt's foreign policy since the ouster of Hosni Mubarak aims to help reassert Cairo's leadership in the Arab world, establish good relations with all powers in the region, and give priority to Egyptian interests. The world continues to await the outcome or fallout of the revolution. Read about the revolution and how it has affected the country's foreign policy. Summary 1. Egypt occupies a strategic position as a land bridge between two continents, Africa and Asia, and a link between two principal waterways, the Mediterranean Sea and the Indian Ocean. Egyptian foreign policy objectives include fostering peace and stability regionally and internationally, abiding by a balanced foreign policy that is related to the strategic goals and interests within an Egyptian independent decision-making, entrenching the principle of mutual respect among nations, adhering to the principles of international law, respecting covenants and charter, supporting the role of international organizations, enhancing solidarity among nations, and prompting efforts to remove the United Nations, paying special attention to the economic dimension of international relations, considering the Arab sphere a key active move domain for Egypt's foreign policy, while continuing to concentrate on the foreign activities related to other vital spheres, namely the Islamic and African, and the Egyptians' relation with the Nile Basin countries. End of Lecture 12. Thanks for listening.